Darryl Crowder, Chief Operating Officer at GACW. We've been working away for the last 10 years or so on developing a new wheel. That little representation on the wall sort of gives you a bit of background on how the wheel functions. There's between 8 and 12 cylinders, and providing that pneumatic effect between the rim and the outside drum. Apart from that, that's the only similarity or tie. So a little bit on the wheel. It's a steel structure designed to last the life of the vehicle, meaning if your life on your asset is 100,000 hours, the wheel goes on, it stays on for 100,000 hours. There's between 8 and 12 pneumatic cylinders in each wheel, depending on the size. And the treads are individual replaceable polyurethane or steel treads, depending on the application. We had to do some work on steel treads for applications in slag mills and that sort of stuff, where they're running on hot molten material. A little bit on safety. There's nothing new to you guys here. There's no tyre changes required in dangerous situations. These wheels can't go flat. They can't fall apart. There is no sidewall to erode. There's no bead to come off. There's no lock ring to fall off. They're a steel structure with a run flat feature that if there is a catastrophic event where you run into something, you'll still safely be able to drive back to the workshop, dump your load, drive back to your workshop, and then do the integration in your workshop in a controlled environment. They don't get hot, they don't burn, they don't overheat in operation at all. Very high lateral stability and increased traction, which I'll talk about a little bit later. The structure of the wheel itself, as I said before, it's engineered to last the life of the vehicle, made with ductile steel, and what that means is a grade 350 plate. The reason we've done all of this stuff we're talking about now is that if there is an intervention on site because of an impact or some damage, your fitters and boiler makers on site will be able to do the repairs, all but a catastrophic event, of course. The cylinders are nitrogen suspension cylinders, the same as what's in your suspension in your car. They push and pull equally in both directions. They're obviously nitrogen filled. They have an operating pressure at around 3,000 psi. They're inflated to 1,000-ish, depending on the application. Under load, they operate up to 3, but they're rated up to 10,000 psi. The reason we've done that is for redundancy. You could lose a couple of cylinders in that group, and the operator would never notice. In operation, you'd pick it up when you next did maintenance. And that's really to satisfy the reliability engineers in the room, because the first question is talking about cylinders, so we can go into a lot of detail on that as well. They're auto-lubricated, and they're bi-directional, as I touched on before. The wheels themselves are sealed against mud, dust, rocks, water. They're IP68 rated internally, so all the internal areas of the wheel are protected, unless they're damaged in some way, of course. All the nuts and bolts you can see and all the connections on the wheel, they'll be in every one of your stores on every mine site. So if anything's lost or missing or needs replacing, it can just be replaced very quickly on site in the regular maintenance intervals. The tread on the wheels, we have what we call shoes, what we call them, bolted to the outside steel drum. In the case of a 793 or a 57-inch wheel, for instance, there's 14. On a loader in the same size, there's 18, because it's a slightly different configuration. They last about, we'll guarantee them to last 2.5 times your scrap life average on site, but in practice we know it's in excess of 5 times for a number of reasons, but the most important one is we don't have a sidewall, we don't have bead erosion, we don't have a structure within a tyre to fail. The only thing that can fail is we wear them out or cut them out through cutting and that sort of stuff. They don't deform in operation. There's no pressure differences, don't affect performance, nor does load. One of the advantages we got with the polyurethane we put onto the shoes is we can play with the shore hardness. So if you've got a site that's very abrasive, we can harden it up. With a lot of cutting in some of the coal applications, we can soften it up to be more resistant to cutting. And in underground applications, as you all know with polyurethane, we can introduce FRAS and other products to take away all that spark and static ignition source. We've also done a lot of work on a polyurethane grade now to be used within slag mills and that sort of stuff. So if you're in an environment that's incredibly hot, it just won't burn. It'll react very well to heat, and it'll still blister a little bit, but it won't break down. The dynamic differences between the ASW and your current inflated tyre wheel combinations. The wheels are a flexible coupler, reducing stress and strain in your axle, transmission and engine. What that means is from a truck or an asset point of view, it feels about 70% less load than it does with the tyre and rim because it's absorbed within the dynamic effect of those cylinders within the wheel. The big claim, the next one, no loss of traction and reduced skidding lift. It's reduced to a factor of about 20 to 30% from a point of view of traction. So we've got increased traction and reduced opportunity for skidding. And we've done a lot of brakes testing and a lot of skid pan testing to validate that in all conditions that we can simulate. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a sec as well. Fuel savings. Around 70% less rolling resistance than pneumatic tyres. What that means from a fuel point of view is we quote in all of our models 3% fuel reduction. We know it's a lot more than that, 3 to 6 times more than that from a diesel reduction point of view. So there's some big claims there that need to be validated over time. But all the testing we've done is we've got a significant amount of data on that, and we're happy to share that with industry as you need it. Improved braking cylinders due to the cylinders with the stored energy. All the brake testing and modelling we've done, now this is on haul trucks, in brake and skid pan testing, it's around 25% shorter braking distance, or if you with the same amount of energy through your brakes, or 25% less energy to pull up in the same distance. And again, I'll touch on that and I'll show some video examples of that in a minute. And the non-suspended weight. About 65% of the weight of the ASW is ground supported, meaning that the outside steel drum is connected to the truck, in this case, through the rim. And the cylinders are supporting about 65% of the weight of the wheel, with the truck floating inside that steel drum, suspended by the cylinders that are pushing and pulling. So from a theoretical weight, the ASW itself, in real terms, is no heavier than your current tyre and rim combination, but your asset is only feeling 35% of what it is currently with your tyre and rim through those advantages. So there's some significant opportunities there, and I'll talk about them a little bit later as well. So a little bit on the physics, just to give a bit more detail on what I just talked about. We've done a whole white paper on this, if anyone's interested, and it's been published and reviewed by globally now. The hub leads the wheel, and what I mean by that is when you put weight on the wheel, and if you look at the direction of the cylinders and the way they're orientated, when you're stopped, your truck will actually fit, or your axle centres will sit forward inside that steel drum. So if you're in a workshop environment, and that's the easiest test for anyone, and you take your foot off the brakes and de-energise the system, your truck will just start rolling forward because it's trying to catch up, or the drum is trying to catch up to the centre line of your axle, which is sitting off-centre forward inside the drum. So that's really what that's trying to say. It's flexible torque coupler, meaning that those cylinders load up in operation, in acceleration and deceleration. Reduce rolling resistance because you're not pushing through the pneumatic bellowing in the bottom of a tyre. Reduce stress and strain on your drivetrain in the area of 60%, less strain. The non-suspended weight, which I touched on before. The large amount of twist within the operation. So in acceleration, in modelling, the operator can't feel it, but there is a delay when he's taking off because the cylinders load up. And conversely, when you're braking, those cylinders have that stored energy to assist in the braking. That's part of the fuel saving stuff. The Rhino balancing, the self-aligning, a very small contact area under any load, and progressively hardening impact on stiffness on impact. So it's not an immediate shock load. And the wheels tend to, if you come up against an obstacle, the cylinders will load up and you'll climb over it very quickly and simply, rather than having to bounce over it as you do with a pneumatic tyre. little bit on the field testing, how we've got to this point now. In 2015, 45-inch loader was one of the first we did in a slag mill operation. And then we've progressed through a whole bunch of testing over the years on different assets. All of those tests have been paid by us. So we've built wheels, partnered with a mining house, put them onto site, and then tested them, had to prove all of our engineering and all of our results, and then improve what we'd found. Very early in the piece, vibration was one of the biggest findings, that operator environment, so we had to reduce dampeners, and then the lateral restraints needed strengthening. So it's been a long and expensive and challenging journey to get us to this point, but very proud to say now we're at operational release stage and we've got wheels out in the field working away. Through all that testing, that was sort of some of the key results that industry's been really keen to validate, and we validated it now. And that is that there's no need for rotation. You put a wheel in POS 1, it stays there for the life of that asset. They're heat and cut resistant, they're self-aligning and auto-balancing. There's no need for protective chains on loaders at all. Shorter braking distances, 12 to 25% shorter in all conditions. And that's comparing it directly with a pneumatic tyre, same load, do the brake test, take it off, put ours on, do the same test in all the different conditions we could simulate. Heat generation, around about, we're saying 15 to 13% less measured. There wasn't a lot of heat generated at all in any of our testing, but that was where the data came through. 20 to 36% less rolling resistance, and that's on a cat. In the Caterpillar tables, they've got some load or some road condition tables they use as a matrix. We used class 4 and 5 for that 20 to 36% rolling resistance change, and that's pretty much the worst conditions we see here in Australia in a coal operation. High levels of heat dissipation, shorter turning radius, more direct steering. Now, these are feedback direct from operators, less lateral stray, and the big one from operators now is less vibration and more control. Any operator you talk to who first used them says, I'm feeling more vibration. And you can't convince them they're not until you actually show them the data, that they're actually not getting as much vibration, but then they start clocking. It's like when you put a high performance or a low profile tyre on your car, you feel more feedback from the road, your steering feels a little more direct, and you feel like a bit more control. That's what they're feeling, and as soon as they clock that, their mindset changes straight away from vibration, which is pretty cool. Just a little bit on the background engineering and FEA modelling we do with all of the designs. And I'll just focus on the bits at the bottom. But on all the FEA and design modelling, we focus on worst case load, highest speed and sharpest curve from a force point of view. And then we apply a factor of safety on top. So we're using, the base data is 20% overload, 20% dynamic load on top of maximum. We're doing everything at 0.25 G from a lateral force. Your tyres are rated to 0.15 G, so we've added the factor of safety on top of that, and we've done all the modelling at 60 kilometres an hour. And then on top of that, we overlay another factor of safety, being road and vibration impacts at 130%, fatigue at 150 on the tyre and shoe, fatigue on all other, so all the steel elements at 165%, and then peak load at 170% on top of all of that. So we've tried to make it, from an engineering point of view, as robust as we can, and all of that testing you saw before was to prove all of that. And we got some of it wrong. And the biggest thing we got wrong was not understanding what the real forces were, because when we go back and look at load tables and all the published data from the OEMs, they were understated by as much as 300% on what it actually was. So we had to learn with our mining partners what the actual forces were, and then redesign to suit. There's a little example of that with the spring scissors. This really became evident on the Cat 994. The first set of wheels we put on site at Christmas Creek over in Iron Ore at FMG. The wheels went well for the first shift, and then that night we broke the wheel. Well, they broke the wheel, I blame them. and it catastrophically failed internally. The one thing we did have is we had a whole bunch of strain gauges and things within the wheel, so we were able to identify what was wrong, apart from the fact it broke, and understand why it broke. And what was clear to us, and that was that statement I made before, is that all of the basis line assumption we used from force, which we got from the OEM data and from experience we had from site, was understated by about 300%. There was two reasons for that. One is very hard to measure from an OEM point of view, because tyres, it's very difficult to put strain gauges inside rubber. And also there were some operator challenges with static turning, and the operator environment was very challenging in that application. The good part is then we had the worst case to work from. So we went away and rebuilt the suspension within the wheel to manage that lateral force. And that's a bit of an example of what's on the wall there. We had to build that test jig, and to give you an idea on scale, it's 11 tonne of steel in that test jig. It's got 150 tonne dual acting rams in there to stimulate the forces inside the 994 wheel. And then that spring system you can see there, there's 21 600 mil long, 120 mil wide springs, all sandwiched together, that we applied those forces to measure exactly what we needed within that wheel, after we obviously redesigned it and had to prove the FEAs. So rather than go and break another set of loader wheels, we did the testing this way this time around. And the good news from our point of view, the spring did fail, but at 6 times over what we knew the forces were. And it was a bolt, it's actually a nut within that spring that let go. So they're now manufactured and part of the 994 wheel, and we've used that within the 793 development and everything as well now. And those wheels are actually getting picked up in Mackay next week, and we're back in operation at FMG in about 3 weeks' time. From an implementation consideration point of view from mine sites, we published a white paper called Dynamic Differences between ASW and inflated tyre wheel combination about 2 years ago, and that was sent out through all the mining houses, and most of the companies you guys work for will have seen it and responded to it. The Mines Inspectorate in Queensland had a big input into it, and they raised 9 points for further information from their end. And in addition to those, there are another 5 that came from mining houses around the world that they'd like more information on. So that 70-page white paper, we went away, and those 14 points you can see listed there, they're just black red writing. The first 9 were from the Mines Inspectorate up there, where they wanted more information, and the next 5 were just general across industry. We went away and wrote another white paper, which a professor of dynamic engineering wrote, our lead designer, Zoltan, called ASW Implementation Considerations, and replied directly to the Mines Inspectorate in Queensland and to the mining houses that participated. And then we did a round table around the country of presenting by a professor of dynamic engineering to the engineering community about what this means. That's all been signed off now. We clarified all the questions to the point where we didn't get any feedback saying we need more information. And that white paper is now used through the engineering community globally in 260 universities as part of the new wheel design, which is pretty cool. We then went away and did an engineering risk assessment with a third party in Queensland. We had 6 independent people sit on that risk assessment, including a retired inspector from down here. And that risk assessment was 5 days of work and quite a big document that's produced to share with all mining houses to form part of their own site-based risk assessments once they start to get through their implementation stages here. This is just a quick sample of one of the mining houses. It's actually one in New South Wales, on a sample site that has 30 793F trucks. They use 6% fuel savings in their model. They went away and looked at all of our fuel data and were comfortable to use that in their model. And then looked at the cost-benefit analysis on the ASW versus their inflated tyre wheel without taking any other savings into account. So the only things in this model is the time taken to change a tyre, the number of tyre changes, and they pulled the model together. What it meant for them was a total cost reduction over their current tyre and rims of 34%, and 360 less tyre changes a year. Their scrap life average is 6,000 hours, so it's relatively low. Hopefully you guys are getting a bit better than that. And tyres are getting changed twice in their life because they get rotated from front to rear. And they allowed, I think, 2.2 hours or 2 hours per tyre chain. What it meant for them was 360 less times they were having to play with a tyre, which is significant, and an additional 918 hours of production hours for that fleet, mostly because you're not stopping to change a tyre. Some key points and benefits in addition to that numbers you just saw for your sites, and these will be big for you guys. There's no stored pressure management required, i.e. no tyre changes. Most of the controls under AS 4457 and recognised standard 13 for the Queensland guys don't apply, because you don't have to deal with that pressure vessel anymore. You've still got to deal with a big rolling thing that can hurt people, but it can't go pop, things can't fly off it. So there's no need for a tyre bay. It can be done all in by your fitters in your workshop. The ASW being a flexible coupler, reducing stress and strain on axle, transmission and engine. We have no idea, and we're not trying to anticipate what that can mean from a maintenance and life of truck point of view and a cost, but it will be significant because there's 70% less load on all of those components. The non-suspended weight, you effectively got a lighter wheel in operation. And then the big ones, which you all pay for every day, there's no tyre management, no compressed air or other gases to deal with, no heat or risk of fires to do with lightning strikes or anything else. There's no chemicals, no TPMS, no tyre storage, no TKPH, no tyre rotation, no off-site tyre repairs, improved circuit times. And what I'm meaning by that is the ASW, from a lateral force point of view, will handle about 10 times the lateral force a tyre will. So you can go around a corner as fast as it's safe for the asset. Doesn't mean go around a corner quicker, because the asset will break. It's not designed to go around a corner quicker. But what it does mean is all your slowing down and all your events you have that cause you to slow down for cornering or through hot tyres and all those things aren't an impact on the wheel. And fuel savings or increased battery life simply because of the rolling resistance changes. It's just some photos fitted on a 777 and a 994 loader. But just some quick videos. If you can just remember to turn that volume off if you haven't already, please, guys. There's a little catch cry on every one of these videos, and we put it on all of our marketing, all our advertising and all of our technical information now, and it's just because you can doesn't mean you should. And that was really hit home to us hard by the inspectorate in Queensland, because trucks have lots of problems with cracking chassis and all sorts of things, and we're going to make them worse if people go quicker and create more force. So it's really around, we're proving some information here, but you don't have to go and prove it yourselves on site. This is just a very quick, simple part of one of the brake tests. We had weeks of this, so we did it wet, dry, inclines, uphills, fully loaded, partially loaded. All this test was doing in this quick representation was showing a 60 kilometres an hour, hitting a gate, putting the brakes on with controlled braking, so we could measure the force. Pneumatic tyre versus the ASW. And in this case, we were pulling up in 7 foot compared to 12 with the tyres. And whether it was wet, dry, uphill, downhill, loaded, unloaded, it was about the same percentage. So it was around 20-25% shorter braking distance with the same amount of force in every example. This one here, this is one of our FEA tests. We convinced the site, firstly, that we wanted to put a lot more lateral force than the truck was designed to test the wheels. We obviously loaded it in a way that it was loaded on the inside. We convinced an operator he wasn't going to get hurt, and then we drove it in circles as fast as we could until we broke the wheel, because we had to prove the FEA data in the model. In this case, he kept going faster and faster until one of the lateral restraints burst inside the wheel. The good thing for us, it was 14 times higher lateral force than a tyre would have failed at. So significantly more force. And also then we were able to drive back to the workshop, replace the lateral restraint and put it back and complete the rest of our testing. So even though we had a critical incident, we were able to rectify it very quickly and get back to work and prove our FEA in engineering. a little one of a loader running around, which is pretty boring. But that's on a 994 over in iron ore. The next one's a little more interesting for your loader operators in the room. It's a 60-ton ore body in the bucket. And for anyone that's operated the machines would know, if you did this test with pneumatic tyres, your rear wheels would lift off the ground and be jumping all over the place. It's a good representation to show you the effect of the cylinders and how much control they put on it. Another really interesting point with the work we've done with FMG, that loader went into onto site and was set for 3 weeks of break-in testing. So all the different operators and all different crews got into a controlled environment and operated it and got familiar with it before we put it into service. And that came up in their risk assessment as something they wanted to do. They had 2 of their more senior guys on the first day. They were in that controlled area for half an hour, and the whole risk assessment was binned at that point, the break-in testing, and it went to full production in less than an hour. They were that excited by the change in operating their assets. So it was a pretty cool story. That's me. I tried to keep it short.